Now, a little bit about our moderator for today's conversation. Amanda Joy is an author and bookstagrammer, and her newest novel, which just came out on Tuesday, so she has a brand new book baby, is called A Queen of Gilded Horns, and she earned her MFA in writing for children at the New School. Her debut, A River of Royal Blood, is a Junior Library Guild selection, and she lives in Chicago with her dog Luna. So, of course, we want to welcome Amanda. And then about our featured author today. Samantha Shannon is the New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author of the Bone Season series. Her work has been translated into 26 languages. Her fourth novel, The Priory of the Orange Tree, was her first outside of the Bone Season series and was a New York Times bestseller. She's joining us today from London, and she's here to discuss the latest installment in the Bone series.
I guess that's Luna.
Luna is very excited about the next the next title of the Bone Season series. This is book number 4. It's The Mask Falling. So please join me in welcoming Samantha Shannon, Amanda Joy, and Luna.
She's being so talkative.
I love that she introduced herself. That was amazing.
She's very insistent. I am hoping that she will be very quiet. Hopefully, she's quieting down. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you about one of my favorite series. Like, I'm such a fan. So this is really exciting.
I'm such a fan of you, so I'm so glad that you agreed to do this.
Yeah, I have so many questions. So of course, this is the 4th book in the series, so I'll try to keep my questions spoiler free, even though I would love to get into all the details, but that's probably a bad idea. So this is the 4th book in the series, which must feel like a huge accomplishment. Like, how does this feel different to the other experiences of publishing the books, and how has COVID made this experience unique for you?
Yeah, I'm just so glad that it's finally out, mostly because it took such a long time to get this one published. Because normally I'm generally a writer who produces a book every 2 years. I can't seem to get them out every year. I'm in awe of authors who can do that. Yeah, it's hard, right?
I can't, I don't know. And I know with your word count, it's just something that takes a long time to emotionally get it out. It's not even necessarily the writing.
No, it's just the whole process of getting a book out. It's the thinking, it's the connecting to the characters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot behind it. So I'm always in awe when authors are just pumping out these massive books every single year. It's just amazing to me. I can't seem to do it. But fortunately, because I'm in adult rather than YA, there's not quite so much pressure to pound a book out every so often. So I'm relieved this one's finally out, because basically I had a lot of trouble with the songwriting. That was the 3rd book. It was really, really difficult for me. Basically, I think I was treating it a bit like a bridge between the 2nd and the 4th books, rather than giving it a robust story of its own. Mm-hmm. So I ended up pretty much having to completely rewrite it. And my editor had it for a really, really long time. And during that period, because I'm a full-time author, I decided I should write something else, which was The Priory of the Orange Tree. And then that ended up causing such a delay for the mask falling. And I just hadn't realized what a massive delay it was going to cause, probably because I didn't realize how massive Priory was going to be. And it just ended up causing this enormous gap. And every single year that was going by, I was panicking and thinking, oh my God, I've destroyed the series. No one's going to want to read The Mask Falling after this huge 4-year wait. And, when Bloomsbury had to delay it, it just destroyed me every single time. I think it was delayed twice. The first one was because of a bereavement, because my grandmother had died, so I missed a few vital deadlines, and then the next, and there was various COVID related rescheduling as well. So COVID didn't affect it massively. So there was one slightly weird thing where we had this release date in January, and then we had to move it to February, but then Sarah J. Maas got moved to February, so I had to move back to January to avoid a clash, because I don't want to come out on the same day as Sarah's book, because she's a very big deal. So there was a little bit of that, but it's mostly been my new Priory related project that COVID has affected, because I'm a writer who likes to move around a lot. I don't know about you, but I like to go to cafes and to go to friends' houses or whatever. And I couldn't do that. So it really slowed me down a lot.
Yeah, and then there's also like the element of travel. I wonder how much travel like comes into your research process, and also just being able to go places to do research. Like I miss like actually having access to stacks at a library, like legitimately be able to spend the day, like getting as myopic as I want, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Like I like to do, I know it's a massive, privilege to be able to travel for research, but it is something that I like to do, especially for the Bone Season books, because they are very city oriented and the city becomes a character. So I was lucky that I had done most of the research for the Mask Falling pre-pandemic, because I'd had to go to Paris quite a lot to immerse myself in Paris and to just to walk around and just absorb it and think about places that might work for this particular story. But I'm very similar with the library. Like I did a lot of research at the British Library in order to write the Priory of the Orange Tree. It has access to so many amazing resources, and I just couldn't access most of the things anymore. So it has been quite challenging. Yeah, but at least the Mask Falling was mostly researched beforehand, so I was okay with the Parisian side of it.
Yeah, I was thinking that it must have taken a lot to like really sink into that world and find the sort of connective tissue between Paris and Scion Paris. So one of my favorite things, or honestly probably my favorite thing about the Bone Season as a series, is how the blend of genre, where it's giving, it's a dystopian and near future, and it's also paranormal, urban fantasy, as in it's like really the city is such a character. I would love for you to talk about how all of those elements came into the series and how they influence each other. And yeah.
Sure. So it was weird because it probably could have been two separate books, The Bone Season, because I came up with two separate ideas for the story when I first conceived of the series. So it was, the first idea began when I was working in London as an intern for a literary agent, which was at the same time I was at university, and I got a summer internship as like a literary agent's assistant. And it was in Seven Dials, which for anyone who doesn't know is a small district of Covent Garden in London. And I had never been to that area before, even though I grew up in London. I'd never specifically been to this part. And there were a lot of stores in the area that sold like crystal balls and tarot cards and that kind of thing. And I'm sure there is one, but I had never seen a novel that used clairvoyance as a magic system before, like divination and that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I could probably do something with that and do like a modern day witch hunt, I guess. So that was where the paranormal idea came in. And I guess that was also where the dystopia came in, because I was thinking it could be like the government could be like a witch hunting kind of clairvoyant hunting organization. And then at the same time, I was studying at Oxford, and I was in a bit of a weird place mentally. Like I didn't really feel like I fit in there, and I was just in a bit of a dark, it was very high pressure, and I was just not mentally in a great place. So I kind of started imagining Oxford through this lens of making it into a very sinister place and imagining all the colleges as residences for these creatures. And that was also where a dystopian element came in. And I probably could have made them into two separate ideas, but I decided to just smash them together because I'm nothing if not ambitious. And that's what happened. So it ended up being this weird blend of like fantasy and paranormal, and it was.
And it's fascinating for me, like as a person who's never been to Oxford, like all other books that are set there are this very romanticized ideal, and the Bone Season is the complete opposite of that.
That was my mental state at the time. And also, like, I didn't really want to romanticize Oxford because it's not a perfect place by any means. So I wanted to explore it from a different angle. I mean, I did feel very out of my depth there. There's lots I enjoyed about it. Like I appreciate what a privilege it was to go there. But there was just so many elements about it that made me feel very uneasy and unsettled a lot of the time. So I think I was channeling that into the Bone Season when I wrote it. So it's weird because the whole series kind of started off. I wrote this novel before I wrote the Bone Season when I was 15. I wrote this novel called Aurora. And that's where I developed the concept of dreamscapes and also kind of created the character of Warden, although he was very different. And that was a very pure, like, paranormal romance. So that's kind of where the paranormal romance element came from. I think it was just it was me integrating some of the better ideas from Aurora into the Bone season.
I love how books can also, like, sometimes people think like it can be this one single idea, this one bit of information, but it really is such an amalgamation of like internal things, external things, bits of inspiration, like all these different things.
Did you find that for A River of Royal Blood? Was it just one idea?
Yeah, like I knew, so the little sort of first nugget of it was that my older brother had been making me read the Wheel of Time series, which he is like his great obsession, and I kind of became obsessed too. And there was this one character, Tuan, who is like, she's an empress in the book, or she's about to become empress in the book. And she has a whole host of siblings, and they have, you know, killed each other to such lengths to where she is now the heir. And I was like super interested in this idea because in the book, there doesn't seem to be any sense of camaraderie between the siblings, even like with that in mind. So they're raised obviously knowing that you know, their lives are going to be cutthroat. They're not raised with love in their hearts for each other. And so I wanted to do the opposite of that, where they do have to kill each other, but they are raised loving each other. So they are actually true siblings. And like how that can change things. Yeah. And then also like a lot of my favorite like genre, I really wanted to combine like a high fantasy with an urban fantasy. So I wanted to do like I wanted to do my like vampire equivalent, I wanted to do my chimera, I wanted to do like all those elements within Second World.
Yeah, it was really cool. I love that you had like 4 different groups that you're dealing with, you know, and it's very cool that you managed to balance them.
It's so funny, the things, because I think if I was setting out to do an idea now, I would not choose to have 4. I would not have chosen.
Oh, really?
If I knew like all of the problems that it would cause me down the line of having to like keep things straight and make things clear for readers, I probably wouldn't have. But at the same time, like it's also very still precious to me. But like it's interesting how that learning curve between first novel and second novel, you can kind of see what problems you will actually create for yourself before you actually create them. A little bit to a certain degree.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like when I read back on the Bone season, like there's so many things I put into that, and I'm just like, why did you put so much into it? Like there is so much information in this book, like just shaking my younger self.
That was like the main like bulk of my editing, was really shaving down that information and like cutting down the expansive like parts of the world that could actually like just shave away from the story but still keep the story, which is, you know, just part of the YA gig.
It must be really challenging with YA because you're trying to create like a big rich world, but then you're quite limited by things like word count, right?
Like the first draft of River was 147,000.
Wow.
And I got it down to 90, which is
that's
like
very impressive.
Still wild to me. But I cut like I went at that Joker with a hacksaw.
I want to read the unedited version now. So many more scenes.
Wild.
Really?
Pretty wild. There is a whole other like love interest. It was pretty wild.
Oh wow.
When I wrote, I was in grad school most of the time I wrote that. And one of our professors used to call me the bodice ripper. Because she thought it was so steamy. Like,
really? Oh my god! I want to read this. Send this to me.
It's something else. It's something else. Yeah. I think on it all the time and how truly different of a book it would have been.
Wow, I'm really curious now.
Lots of blood, more blood.
Well, it is called A River of Royal Blood, so that does make sense.
That's funny though, because back then it was like Untamed, and which I was like not a suitable like name for the novel at all, but it was just a very different book, which is it's just interesting. It's almost like 2 different entities in my head, if I had kept going that way, what that book would have been and what this book ended up being, which is better to me, obviously. But So I also want to ask, because I feel like in the Bone season, um, even though it's like near future, it's still very in touch with history, like in all of the books, and also Priory obviously is very much rooted in history. And I would love for you to talk about how history influences your writing and in the conception of your stories as well.
Yeah, it was interesting with the Bone season because originally, I think I thought about when to set it, and I have a version of the early chapters where it's set more in the present day, which is quite interesting to read. And then I thought, okay, I'll set it in the future. The reason I chose the exact date of 2059 was because I wanted there to be a real world event that was the marker at which the Bone season world splits from ours. So I chose this. There was this huge solar storm in 1859. And it was so bright that there were like auroras all the way across the world, and people were like waking up in the middle of the night thinking it was dawn. And I thought that seemed like quite a cool idea for this moment where the veil between the worlds breaks. So I chose that. And then I thought, well, okay, I wanted it to be like a significant anniversary after that date. And if it had been 100 years, it would have taken me to 1959. And I wasn't really feeling it as like a 50s story. So I decided to just jump into 2059. But it's quite weird now because we're already in 2021. And at some point, the Bone season is not going to be futuristic anymore, which is kind of a weird feeling because I planned it as futuristic, but we're going to overtake it during my lifetime, which is really weird because it's going to become bizarre. Yeah, and like some of the characters have already been born in our timeline. So Jackson was born in 2011, so it's kind of this weird.
That's so it's weird really to think about Jackson as a like Gen Z, like that's so weird to think about.
he's like a child at the moment, just running around it. It's really strange thinking about that, but it's kind of fun as well, just having this like kind of alternate timeline. But yeah, I thought it was interesting to sort of keep the more Dickensian vibe about it by sticking it in the Victorian era. So the idea is that even though it's 2059, Scion is reflecting the world of 1859 to suggest that it kind of stagnated at that period in history. So I just wanted to give it a bit more of an interesting aesthetic. There's other reasons, but I think that whenever you get futuristic stuff, you often get this very sleek, kind of clean, minimalist aesthetic. And I wanted to do something a bit more grungy and a bit more like, Victorian,
because it's still cities
of London. Exactly. Yeah. And I just wanted it to have a slightly different feel to it rather than that very surgical. I mean, it's more surgical as you get towards Scion's central high command, but with the clairvoyance, I wanted them to feel a bit more kind of Dickensian and a bit flamboyant and fun. So that was where that came from. And then with Priory, that was interesting as well, because Priory is a reimagining of the legend of St. George and the Dragon. And I was trying to find like a period. I wasn't sure whether to make it like completely high fantasy or whether to make it kind of rooted in our world or whether it would just be like a pure retelling from literal England. But I ended up wanting to do a historically inspired fantasy. Partly because the version of St. George and the Dragon that I was most interested in, which is to me is the most problematic one, was written by an Elizabethan writer. So I was quite interested in that aesthetic, and also world politics were just really interesting at that point in history. So that was why. But I love history and I love using it to inform fantasy. I think it's really interesting from a research perspective, from a creative perspective. So I just like it. I like history.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing to read, I think, that I cannot do. Like, I just love, there's something about it that just feels so, so many things are being said at once. Which is what I like about it. So
was River of Royal Blood like inspired by any history? It's North Africa inspired, right?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do with River, and the reason that I chose North Africa, because I was thinking about all of the waves of different controllers and different rulers in the region. And I wanted to have the sort of humans as these outside actors coming in that way, but I didn't get like super specific in the history, just because I didn't want to dive too deep into all the research and stuff.
Yeah, it's difficult because you almost have to do the research in order to figure out how to tweak the history. Like you have to know the history to know how to introduce the history into a fantasy world. So at least that's how I deal with it anyway. I feel like I need to thoroughly research a period of history and then integrate it rather than just grabbing things. It's sort of a difficult balance to strike.
Mm-hmm. And as far as like conception of your projects, do you feel like what sort of elements come to you first? Do you feel like the setting comes to you first, the world, the conflict, the character?
It's sort of a combination. Like with the Bone season, like I said, it was partly the setting of London and Oxford was what informed the beginning of it. But it was also the character of Paige walked into my head very strongly. And it always sounds a bit cliche when an author's like, yeah, like you're kind of like, yeah, she dream walked into my head. It always sounds a bit cliche when an author's like, oh, they just walked into my head. But she sort of did. Like I was sitting there working, doing my little intern job. And she just came into my head and I heard her voice. Like, I like to imagine there were more of us in the beginning, which is the first line. And I've never written in first person before then, like ever. I always write in third. So it was really weird having this voice in my head, like a first person. I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to roll with that. So I just started writing in that perspective and I found that the words flowed. So for that, it was a combination of character and setting, I suppose. And then Priory was very much with a purpose. Like I want to reimagine the legend of St. George because it's a legend that I find is used in a very unpleasant way in this country a lot of the time. Like, so he's the patron saint of England, and a lot of people, I find that he's a little bit associated with like the right wing and kind of he's becoming more politicized. It's like a whole thing. And the legend, I was interested in the foundations of the legend, and the more I researched it, the more troubled I was by it. It's quite an ugly story. It's very sexist. It's xenophobic. It's just a really unpleasant story. And I was like, so I want to answer this. I want to deconstruct this legend and reframe it in a way that makes sense to me. So that was very intentional. Like I went to do all the research with that purpose. I was researching like every single version of the legend that I could get my hands on, trying to figure out how to make it into a different story and to kind of shout back at that history. So that was very much the purpose behind that one.
I don't know how much you can tell me, but does the next Priory project take a specific legend like that?
Not so much, no. Like, again, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say.
Right.
I'm just seeing if this is anyone from Bloomsbury watching.
Me just trying to eke out little bits of information.
So it's set in the same world as Priory, and it basically recounts a different period of the world's history. So it does deal a little bit with the legend of St. George, and it takes a bit of inspiration from other stories and definitely from history, a lot from history in this one. But it's not quite so strongly modeled on just one story Priory actually retells two stories, but George was the one that kind of impelled me into it. But yeah, it's not quite so, it's not like a specific retelling of one legend, the new one.
Yeah. And also I just am curious, like as far as Priory in terms of influences, I'm really curious about the actual Priory of the Orange Tree, as the influences there. If you could tell me about those.
Yeah, sure. So basically, when I was reading various versions of the St. George story, there was one, like I said, it was the one I found most that I wanted to deconstruct, but it had some quite interesting elements in it that I hadn't seen in the St. George story before. So the one I was taught was quite basic. So there is a king in a country or an emperor, and the country is being plagued by this dragon the people feed their animals to it, and in the end the animals aren't enough, so they start feeding their own people to it by lottery. And that was pretty much the story I got. St. George comes riding by, he offers to kill the dragon, and everyone lives happily ever after, and he marries the damsel. So that was the basic version I knew, but the more I read into it, it became, so there were all these additional elements to it. Like this particular version takes place in Egypt. The damsel is an Egyptian princess, and he basically wants her to convert. He wants her to convert to Christianity from Islam. And that was, to me, when I read that version of it, and this is even present in the very earliest version of the legend, which is where it's a Greek version, I think, and they worship the Greek gods in it. And again, he wants them to convert to Christianity. And I was like, how fascinating, because he's always framed as this heroic figure, this good guy who came to save the damsel and the people. But he wanted to marry the damsel, and she's almost like his trophy for killing the dragon. And also he wants these people to convert from their religion before he's going to kill the dragon.
Right.
That doesn't sound that nice to me. It doesn't sound particularly heroic.
Hostage over people's heads, guy.
Really, yeah, and it's really not good. So I was interested in this particular version. And during the fight against the dragon, the St. George dives underneath an orange tree, and it restores him somehow. It stops the dragon's flame from reaching him, and the fruit restores his strength, and he's able to get back up and fight the dragon after he's injured. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to take this element of the story. There's also this enchantress character, Caleb, who raises St. George. It's all a bit creepy, like it's a bit incestuous. Like she steals him from his parents, and then she raises him, but then she falls in love with him. It's very unsettling. But I was interested in her. There's a lot of very strange things that got written out of the modern version of the story.
Yeah.
And so I thought, how am I going to deconstruct this? And I thought of various ways to do it. I thought of maybe I thought of changing George's character and making him a better person. But mostly I decided that I wanted to give the damsel agency. And one of the ways I thought I would do that was give the damsel the orange tree. So that was kind of where the Priory came from. So I thought, okay, what if she fought the dragon? She was just better than George at fighting the dragon. I didn't think a man who would force the conversion of people would be a particularly nice or a particularly brave man. So I decided to stick with him as more of a bad guy. And I decided I was going to give the orange tree to the damsel, and that she was going to make like a sisterhood around this orange tree and this source of power. And then I kind of extended that into the whole world, and I kind of had a different sort of woman attached to each of the magic trees in the world, like the mulberry tree and the hawthorn tree. And yeah, that's sort of where the Priory came from. It was trying to steal it back from St. George and just give the women of the story some agency, because the original writer pretty much fridges all of the interesting women. He wasn't a very nice guy, the writer, I don't think. He seemed to take a lot of pleasure in kind of making ugliness happening to women. Not a great guy.
Yeah, sounds like a bit of a prick. The one thing also that interests me with the mass falling is how you've used the language in Scion Paris to examine gender in this way. And I'm very curious if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so I pay a lot of attention to language in my books in general. And I know that you can relate to me on this one because you use the word queendom, which I loved seeing in yours as well, because it was kind of weird when you first start using it, but it kind of becomes normal pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. Also not interchangeable with kingdom.
Not interchangeable with kingdom, exactly. It wasn't, and especially for the world of Priory, because it has been, just pure queens from pretty much the beginning. So it was really weird to call it a kingdom because there hasn't been a king in 1,000 years. Right. But yeah, with the mask falling, I knew it was going to be something I was going to have to tackle, because it's not, even though it is a dystopia, it's not a misogynistic world. I mean, it was founded by Nashira, who, she uses a she pronoun. There's absolutely no reason why she would create a misogynistic setting. And it's interesting because people often expect dystopias to be, sexist and racist and homophobic, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It's not what Scion, there was no logical reason for Scion to be that way. So I didn't see why I would replicate that. So when I was approaching French, I mean, I was nervous because I don't speak French myself. I studied Spanish, but obviously that's a very different language.
Oh, really?
It has the I studied Spanish for 8 years. I don't speak French, sadly. But I obviously knew from studying Spanish that Romance languages have a degree of gender-based constraint. Right. And I made sure I spoke to people who did speak French when I was looking into different options. But obviously there's certain rules of French that would not make sense within the Scion world. There's this specific one that the masculine always prevails over the feminine. So if you have a group of, say, 50 women in French, and one man enters the group, the whole group becomes masculine. It's not the case if you have a group of 50 men and a woman enters the group, right? So this didn't make sense. There's no reason why that rule would exist in the world of Scion. So I knew I was going to have to change that. And I was also looking at Madame and Mademoiselle, because they have these very specific associations with a woman's age and with her marital status. And I think legally, Madame is they've kind of ejected Mademoiselle from legal documents now. So Madame is the official word, but a lot of my French-speaking friends that I spoke to said that Madame would feel quite weird for someone of Paige's age. It would feel as if they were addressing a much older person than she is. Yeah, so I basically had to go looking for an alternative to Madame and Mademoiselle. So I found Madelle, which was this kind of combination of both words that was, I think it was used in Canada for a little while, like French-speaking Canada. Didn't ever really catch on because it doesn't make a lot of etymological sense, but I liked it. And it did have some precedent, at least, because it had been used before briefly. So yeah, I went with that. And I know I was very nervous doing it because I felt almost a little bit arrogant, like trying to change a language, but it just didn't. It literally just didn't make sense in the world building context. So I put a note on language at the back to explain why I've done it. I mean, my French translator was very enthusiastic about it. Like he very sweetly went and asked like loads of French women he knew, like, how would you cope with the Madame Mademoiselle issue? And most of them said just invent a new one. So that's what I ended up going with. Yeah. So that was the logic behind it.
Very cool. Yeah, I really curious about that. Also, I think I'm going to take their questions in a bit. I'm just going to ask because I'm very curious always. In terms of your process, your writing process, like there's obviously the cliche question, pants or plotting, even though I kind of find, I don't know if people like, if that really is a coin with other sides or if people just, it's shades of different things with different projects. But what sort of tools do you rely on and in your process of writing the novel?
So my basic approach is that I write a synopsis, first of all, which I generally talk through with my editor after the mess that was the songwriting. So now we have a discussion beforehand about what this book is going to be about, and we talk through the plot points. Yeah, we're just like, it's just for my kind of peace of mind, really, because so much went wrong with the songwriting. I've been a little bit. Yeah.
I have that big fear of like writing a lot of something that is just not going to go anywhere. I have a big fear of that. So I get really like, I replot and plot and plot and plot until I am sure.
Yeah, it's like you need to know the destination almost to kind of figure out, you know, I like to know roughly where I'm going. So I write the synopsis, then I break it down into chapters. And that's pretty much it. I just try to follow my chapter plan. Sometimes it goes, you know, it doesn't quite go to plan. Like I might think of something and, you know, Paige just won't cooperate with me. So I have to do something else with her. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I always feel a bit weird because I know some authors have very complex processes, you know, planning out these kind of three act books, etc. I don't really do that. I just kind of have the story in my head. I know the destination, but not always exactly how I'm going to get there. And it's interesting with the Bone Season because it's, you know, I came up with the series when I was 19 and I'm now 29. So some of my ideas have changed a little bit. Like I didn't realize, but when I looked back at my original synopsis for the series that I sent to Bloomsbury, there was this whole pregnancy plot line that I had completely forgotten about. Like I had no memory.
That's a different. That's so interesting. It's so interesting to think about that. Like, it
was weird. I completely forgotten.
That you think that you're going to be interested in as a writer, and you realize you're not actually interested in those things.
No,
or not
I was
interested in them in that book, you know.
No, like I guess by the time I got there, I was like, wow, I wanted to write a pregnancy into this. This is like the opposite of what I want to do at this point. You know, I think I just completely forgotten I'd ever planned it, which was kind of weird when I look back on it. Because it was like book 6, the pregnancy one. And I was like, what? What's happening? It was just so bizarre. So yeah, that was an interesting what if. But so yeah, I guess I'm kind of a mix of a plotter and a pantser. What about you?
I am one of those people who is like, okay, let me lay it all out, but I'm not necessarily in the details. So I like to do the character arc and then like weave the plot around that.
Right.
And so I tend to like obsessively do those plots. I'll do the like emotional arc for all the characters. But for this book, I wrote the first third of it. And then I was like to her, I have to send you this, and then I'll send you the plot with the rest of it, because I can't keep, I have such anxiety about writing the wrong thing where I'm at right now, that I need you to like look at it. And in the end, the notes that she gave me on it were like truly like barely nothing, but it just made me feel able to continue forward. And then I just wrote off the plot. And then so after doing all of that plotting, I didn't actually have to do too much actual changing of the plot and revision. It was mostly just tweaks. Yeah.
It is nice to have that reassurance, which is why I do the plan now, just so that my editor's like, yeah, this sounds good, go ahead, right?
Yeah, like it just frees a little bit of the worry from me that they're gonna be like, yeah, we're gonna bag that. Like, no.
Well, it's happened to authors I know before. Like, they've literally like written a concept and the editor's been like, no,
it's a no for me.
This is not exactly. It's just not what we wanted, which is a bit nerve-wracking.
It's terrifying, like, because I feel like for me, it takes me a long time. I think one thing that for me, it takes me a long time to fully develop the understanding of what I want to write. It takes me a long time to understand what the world is going to be and how I need the world to function in order to serve the character and all these different things. It takes me so long to figure that out, that the idea of me having put in all that front end work, and the synopsis and everything, and then it just be like wah wah. But
yeah, it's
that's
terrifying.
Just the reality.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah. I guess I should get to some of these other questions here. Okay, so let me go actually to the bottom. Oh no, here we go. Okay, so the first question, Samantha, are you planning to write a novella for next year to put us out of our suspense misery before Bone Season 5 is published?
I think I'll probably have to. No, I think I do have an idea for a novella, so I would like to do that. It probably would focus on perhaps some of the other characters in the series, which will be interesting, because I've always been just locked in Paige's voice. So I thought it might be interesting to perhaps show what some of the other characters have been up to, because a lot of the main cast are not in the Mask Falling at all. They are just gone, because I wanted to have Warden and Paige, or Arcturus and Paige, just by themselves in Paris. So it was like, Nick's not there, Maria's not there. There's like a whole bunch of characters who just don't show up at all. So I thought it might be quite interesting to show what they've been up to. I mean, I haven't sold anything yet, so it's not a guarantee, but Bloomsbury have generally been very good about letting me expand the world where I wanted to. Like, they let me write The Dawn Chorus, it's like a novella that comes between The Song Rising and The Mask Falling, and it allowed me to just broaden where Paige is psychologically, because she's been through so much trauma, and it was just nice to be able to expand on that. So I hope that Bloomsbury will be okay with me writing a novella in the middle. But yeah, so the answer is very long-winded answer, but yes, quite likely.
So we'll have Priory world book before we get 5?
I have no idea. So basically my plan is, I know it's like I'm so nervous about causing another gap in the series. So what I've done is I've just drafted the Priory related project and sent it to Bloomsbury. I'm having my Skype call with them about it on Wednesday, so I'm excited to see what they think. Slightly nervous because it's so long, but it's fine.
I was gonna say, they already read it.
I think so. Like, well, one of my agent's assistants read it in 2 days. I was like, mate, are you okay?
When you're doing that work, there is a part of the brain that they are able to access that is not accessible by people who do not like reading and publishing. Like my friend, she works for a Greek publisher. And so she was first working as a reader, and now she is like actually working in what international books they're picking up. And the amount of books that she has to read in the month, it never ceases to amaze me. Like the volume of books, like 50 books a month. Like
what? Oh my God. I've read 3 books this whole year.
yes. And meanwhile, she's also still writing and like just got like signed with the agent. It's madness. It's something that I cannot even comprehend. Truly.
Wild. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed. But I couldn't believe it when my agent's sort of assistant read it in 2 days. I was like, it's 345,000 words long. Like, how are you still alive? It was very powerful. So Yeah, so they're going to be discussing that with me on Wednesday. And my plan is that I would now like to take about 3 months, during which I'm going to try and go off Twitter, and I'm going to try and draft the whole of book 5 really quickly in 3 months. So I've at least got the draft to work with. And I would prefer it if, I would like it if book 5 came out within 2 years of The Mask falling. I don't really want to create another massive gap in the series. So that's my aim. I don't know how Bloomsbury will feel about that. I don't know if they'll want to bring out the Priory project first. I would rather have the Priory project as the second priority because it's a standalone. So
and it's not necessarily a sequel. So
no, it's not a sequel. It's more like a prequel. But it's not. Nobody's. I mean, I know people are waiting for it because they like Priory, but it's not a continuation of the story. So it's more something that you could put a bit later, and it wouldn't. It's not like writing a continuous series. So that's my plan. But obviously, it's not entirely up to me. So I'm just really, really hoping that I can just have the next few months just to draft 5 at least, and then at least it's drafted, so I can work on it.
Okay, and this next one is from Lauren, I think. What kind of characters are your favorite to write?
What kind of characters? I don't know if I can ask, in what sense she means.
Maybe in terms of the archetype, or.
I mean, I love writing women, if that's an answer, because I just love. I love creating complex female characters, and I like trying to show women doing lots of different things. I like having women casually in the background being knights. It's interesting how we default to male so often. So, for example, when I was writing the Mime Order, there's this scene where Paige has a fight with a dystopian police officer, and she's female, and it was weird because my editor actually marked it as oh, it's really weird, I just assumed they were all male, but why did I think that? And it's weird. You always default male to background characters, but I like kind of doing casual feminism, which I like that you did in the Queendom as well. It's you just show there's something really, it just feels good to just show women just doing casual background things as well as
and I think I like, especially when, I don't know how to explain this, but I like especially when they're not necessarily in a position of moral goodness.
Right. Yeah.
Because needing to always show women in a role of moral uprightness, I think that is also a trap to fall into.
No, definitely.
It's so limiting.
Yeah, because I really liked how you wrote Eva's mother in the books, because she is, she's not particularly sympathetic, and she's powerful and complex, and not, you don't necessarily feel warmly towards her, and I like that. And I've tried to do that in the Bone Season and Priory as well. So I have female villains, there's in the Song Rising, Paige's main antagonist is Hildred Vance, exactly, who's a pretty brutal military commander who specializes in psychological warfare. So she's definitely not sympathetic. And then obviously you have Nashira, who is the main antagonist of the series, is a woman as well. So I like doing that. I like exploring complex characters, and I do like morally grey characters. I love writing Jackson just because he does not care about being good. He just wants to be chaotic. It's so much fun writing him because he just doesn't have that. He doesn't really have the filter. He just says what he thinks, and he expresses it how he likes to express it. And he's very. And
he just talks like a very elegant knife. I love that description.
So I hope that was the kind of answer you were after, Lauren. But basically, complex characters, morally grey characters, and just women doing all the things.
Okay, I'm going to skip this next one because I kind of think we covered that. So this next one is from Laura. You mentioned that Warden's character came to your mind when you were very young. How different was Warden's first draft from how he is currently? And she said, thank you so much for writing TMF. It wrecked me and I loved every second of it. It was,
Thank you so much for reading it. Okay, so here's the story of Warden. It's kind of weird. So like I said, I wrote it when I was 15, Aurora. And at the time I was very much under the influence of Twilight. And this is not to rag on Twilight. I enjoyed Twilight when I was a teenager, but it instilled certain strange ideas about what I thought men should be like into my head. So by the time I was about 15 or 16, I was obsessed with having a dominant, possessive, jealous boyfriend. When I look at my diaries from that time, I am very disturbed. And it's really strange to me now because I'm not like that at all now. I mean, I just thought for some reason that men had to be like jealous and angry, and all these toxic masculinity ideas had been translated into attractiveness in my head.
It was a dark period in YA.
Yeah, it really was. And I hadn't really realized it until I found one of my diaries from that time. And I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. Like, I could have stumbled into a really bad relationship based on this. It was just the stuff I was looking for was really toxic. So anyway, I created the character of Warden. And when I say the character of Warden, I'm talking such a loose kind of idea. Like, he had the same name he looked
that's
similar.
Warden 1 and this is like Warden 52.
This is Warden Blueprint. And he was like, so basically the story of Aurora was fairly simple. It was basically that like 9 very attractive aliens land on Earth, and a young woman is just in the right place at the right time, and she rescues one of these aliens, and she goes on an adventure with him, and the alien was Warden. And when I look back at this draft, I'll have to share some bits from the drafts at some point because it was just ridiculous. Like
I will share a wild scene from River Book 1 if you will also share a wild scene for Aurora.
Okay, you can see toxic masculinity Warden. It's really weird. So because he's like the opposite of that now. But he was just so angry all the time. Like, he's so like sullen and aggressive and like I'm just like, God, why did I think this was attractive? He's horrible. Anyway, so that was Blueprint Warden. When I basically, Aurora was pretty much completely dispensed with. It just wasn't salvageable at all, but I did take the dreamscape concept, and I was like, I feel like Warden could be an interesting character basically if I destroy his character and start again. There she is again. So I basically built his character from the ground up. So I took the basic concept of him and I basically made him the opposite of what he was in Aurora. So I tried to make him much more that he gives Paige her own space. He's not domineering or jealous in any way. I mean, obviously in the first book, he's quite a morally grey figure, but throughout the series, when he became a love interest, I want to develop him in a just basically the opposite of what he was. Just all of those toxic masculinity ideas and just strip them out and create what I hope is a much more interesting and sympathetic character. So that's the story of how I made Warden.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I think also about what I thought that this book was going to be when I first conceived of it, because in my mind, when I first conceived of it, Baka was very much the second love interest. And then and a lot of people liked that, but I also had a friend, my friend Anna Mariano, who also was like, I'm not liking the vibes. I don't want this teacher guy to be like scheming on her. And I was like, you're fully right. Like, I don't like it either. And then the next version of him that came from that version was just so much better. He felt safe. He felt like actually in tune with like the trauma of his life situation more so than like sort of like flirtation. And it made it so much better. So it's just interesting how like the way that I thought that I would be interested in writing male characters has shifted so completely. Like it became so important for Akito to be a very like gentle kind of male character.
He's lovely. I love him so much for that exact reason.
Yeah, I really like felt like it was important to do, if I was going to do this Black male lead, he was going to be a very particular type of man. And I really enjoyed writing him. He's on like my list of like perfect male love interest, just because he's complex, but he is gentle and he's allowed to be gentle. And I think there is a certain, I mean, obviously if it's like what you're into, that's fine. But it's like, there is a lot of kind of emphasis on the alpha male, I think, and these kind of snarling, growling, like angry. And that was what the original Warden was like. And I just decided to make him the opposite of that pretty much. So he's like gentleness, and I think gentleness can be very sexy. I think it's portrayed as it's like weakness, but it's not to me. Tenderness can be very, it's fine in a love interest. I really enjoy that. Okay, so the next one I have, what time is showing we have? Okay, we have a little time left. You also have a non-binary character in The Mask Falling. How important was it for you to build gender inclusivity and gender fluidity into the series?
Yeah, it was really important to me, and it's also something I've done in the next book in the Priory world, because I'm always learning and growing as a person. And when I wrote the Bone season, I really wasn't aware of kind of non-binary identities. I was very young when I wrote it, and I just hadn't heard of being genderqueer, or really, I didn't really know very much about being trans either. I just didn't learn those things until a bit later. I actually learned a lot from joining the book community. So I was determined that I wanted to make the world of Scion as inclusive from a gender perspective as possible. So I decided to introduce that character and to do it quite casually. Like Paige just uses they pronouns. They don't really have a conversation about it. That's just how the character is introduced, and that's the pronoun that Paige uses. Just that kind of casual background representation, I think, can be really important. Just this is part of the fabric of this world. So that was really important to me. And also for the new Priory project I've done, I've thought of like gender neutral titles for the nobility and things like that.
Oh, we have to talk at length about this, because what I'm working on now is very much like figuring out how I am going to make all of queerness like fit into this fantasy world, and am just, it's like so much to think about.
It is a lot to think about. Yeah, it's just, I've written an article for a tour about this that I hope will go up soon-ish, but it's just thinking about all of these words, and I had to really play with like what was going to be my alternative to Lord and Lady and Duke and Duchess, because so many of these titles are so heavily gendered. So I invented the title of High Ruler in Priory, so that was one of the gender neutral titles. But again, Priory does feel quite binary, like, there's not really any acknowledgement of genderqueer identities. So I decided I wanted to broaden it in this new project, so it is much more inclusive of other genders as well. That's what I've done for the next one.
That'll be great. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Do your characters ever reveal to you what they're going to do / say when you yourself as the author aren't sure right away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Paige and I know each other well enough now that I can put her into a scene and she kind of does her own thing to some extent. Like she just has enough of a personality that I feel confident that I can put her in a scene and it will just flow somehow, even if I don't know exactly how she's going to react to a situation. She just does it at this point. So I think it's just nice when you get to know a character to that extent. And I feel very privileged that I've been able to sit with this one character for such a long series, because I've been able to put her in so many different situations and just grow her as a character so much. And we've also grown up together. I was 19 when I started the series and she was 19 as well. So we've had this kind of nice organic relationship. So that's been good. But yeah, pretty much I think at some point the characters do start to take over. I don't know if that's the same for you. Like, do you find that you can just put them in a scene and you sort of trust that?
Especially Baka, I never ever have ever hesitated over a line of dialogue that he has said.
Right.
Other characters, and even strangely enough, Issa snapped into my head like that too. But it just depends. But some characters, they really just have their identity is firm enough that you really know how whatever is going to make them feel.
Yeah, I think once you nail their voice, it's very helpful. Like Baka has such a distinctive voice, so I can see how you could just flow with that character.
Yeah. He's always being.
I love him.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss writing him so much. I try not to think about it, but I hopefully will be able to write him one day again.
I really hope he gets a spin-off.
Same. Okay. Let's see, which is the question? Oh, I wanted to ask this one before we go, because I don't think we've touched on this at all. What was your experience with writing about Paige's trauma in TMF? What were some of the concerns you had, and how did you deal with those?
Yeah, so it's always been very important to me that everything that happens to Paige does have an impact, whether that's physical or mental. So, for example, she breaks her wrist in the first book and she's still dealing with the consequences of that 3 books later. I think there is a pressure on writers, and I imagine that's even more of a pressure in YA because of the word count concern, but there's this pressure to kind of just keep steamrolling ahead with the plot. And so you have to some extent, you see a lot of trauma get just brushed under the carpet in books because the writer just doesn't necessarily have the space to expand on it. You have to just get ahead with the plot. And having, had real problems with my mental health, I know that sometimes you just can't carry on. Sometimes you just have to stop and just deal with what you've gone through. And that's difficult in a book because of this forward momentum and this pressure to keep going with the plot. So it was important to me that I honoured what had happened to her as much as possible, because you don't want to show someone getting over something quickly when it's something that might be happening to people in real life. Ideally, you want to try and to show on the page that this is not something you necessarily just spring back from. So I did a lot of research into PTSD and also specifically the consequences of waterboarding and how that would affect someone psychologically and physically. I recognized from the beginning, it obviously wasn't going to be everyone's depiction. It wasn't going to be a perfect depiction that covered how every single person experiences PTSD. And this is difficult in books, because when you're portraying something, it is never going to be everyone's exact experience of that thing. So I was conscious of that going into it, and wanted to remain open to feedback. And if I had done anything that was not a proper, authentic representation, but I did as much research as I physically could, and I hope that it feels authentic. It was just something I wanted to do for that character, just to make sure that didn't just roll off her. It left a lasting impact. And that also goes right back into Paige's childhood, like things that happened to her when she was young, still coming back into her present day.
It's less of individual things happening than this war becomes in book 4, this web of trauma that I really find very compelling, and also it's hard to read, but also like very important, and like actually feels true. Which I love.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you think so.
I guess I have. It's about the end of the hour, but I was going to ask.
We can keep going if you want.
Just because it's like probably a distinction that you would like to make. Hi, Samantha. You mentioned your series is more adult than YA. Could you expand on that? Because I feel like it's usually qualified as YA in libraries and such. From Marion.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole YA adult thing. It's a strange line, and I feel like it's a conversation that we keep having, especially in terms of like how women are often categorized as YA when they're not, which is an interesting conversation. So I with the Bone season, I don't really mind it so much, because I actually, when I sent it to my agent, I said, the character's 19, so she's older than a classic YA protagonist. And also most of the characters are adults, but I was like, I'll just let the publisher decide what they want to do with this. And interestingly, the Bone season is published as YA in most other countries, but it is...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so pretty much all of the foreign publishers did it as YA, I think, which is interesting. But it is adult to me, specifically because of not only Paige's age, but that she is basically the only teenage character in it, and now she's no longer a teenager. So it doesn't, I can definitely see, I'm very happy for it to be, categorized as crossover. It's more the intention. Like, I want people to know that I didn't expressly write this for teens, because there may be content in there that is not aimed at teens, if that makes sense. So it's very happy for teens to read it. I don't really mind it being categorized as YA, because I love YA, and I think there are a lot of crossover elements in the series. But I just, I wouldn't want it to be officially categorized as YA anywhere, because it just wasn't written with that specific intention. Priory being categorized as YA really confuses me, because one of the
MCs is an old man.
He's 64.
What's going on here, guys?
He's 64. I was like, what is happening?
Weirdly, is like my favorite POV. I love that.
Is it really?
POV.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're a fan.
It's so good. But yeah, I think it just becomes unfortunate when crossover just means like you're not seeing the other cross. Like you're just sort of falling to categorize it as YA, when I have never thought of these books as YA.
Yeah.
I can see whatever elements or tropes they would want to pull it, like that would, make that comparison. But
the first book,
as the series advances, it's not like the Mind Mortar is just not like at all YA book.
No, I can definitely see it for the first book because it has some of the classic, like, you know, she's being trained to use her powers, you know, and it you know, it has the kind of the non-human love interest that's quite common in YA. It has, you know, and she is kind of a coming of age story. Like, I mean, Paige knows that she's a dreamwalker, obviously, but she is doing a lot of growing into herself in that book and embracing her power and who she is. So I can definitely see the first book, but like you say, the mime order very much isn't that. And then they just keep not really going in that direction as they go on. It is definitely designed more as an adult series. And Priory especially is definitely adult. I mean, the next one is much sexier, so I'm really hoping that no one categorizes it as YA. But yeah, it is a really interesting question. Like, Priory was I was very glad it was nominated for a few awards in France, but it was nominated in the youth category. Like, it's a French word that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it means youth. And I was like, not really, because I mean the characters are 19. Okay,
yeah, I mean
enough.
It's kind of, I mean, but still, it's not even. It's
weird. I mean, like, Eid is 26 and Loth is 30, so none of these characters are even remotely in the YA range, particularly apart from Tane. But yeah, it's just really strange. So I think it is probably part of it is probably me as well, because I am largely I'm more connected to the YA community kind of socially, I think, just because I love the YA community. Like, it's so passionate and there's so many brilliant books, there's so many brilliant authors having, you know, really, I don't know, I just love the community. It's we have the YA literature convention here in London every year, and it's so much fun, and it's great. And I normally go as a moderator, so I just chair YA authors, but it's so much fun, and I think probably that could be why some people mistake me for a YA author. But again, I love YA, and it's nothing to do with not wanting to be categorized that way because I don't like it. It's more just I don't want someone to hand these books to a 12-year-old, you know.
Yeah, and I also think actually just a YA reader knowing that the book is adult approaches it, and it's not that they won't read it, but they approach it differently.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So yeah.
It's the one that really gets me is when Sarah J. Maas's books get categorized as YA. Like, that bothers me on such a visceral level. I'm like, those are not YA books, not in any way at all.
Especially the last one. It's like, it is distinctly adult. It's distinctly adult. There's no way to. Yeah.
They're like proper like erotic romance at this point. I'm like, I don't know. I think it was partly to do with the old covers. So Bloomsbury's obviously redesigned them, which I think was
which I thought was a good idea.
But yeah, it's definitely an interesting ongoing conversation about, you know, why we categorize certain books certain way.
Definitely. So I guess it's a little past.
Hi.
Hey.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to. This has been. I've just so enjoyed listening to this conversation. I do truly get the feeling that the two of you could actually talk for hours.
I would.
Yeah.
And I think that probably this audience might actually be into listening to you talk for hours, but it is late where you are, Samantha. So we're going to try to be mindful of your time, and just thank you so much. Amanda, your questions were great. The audience's questions were great. I've been enjoying reading the chat. So much love and great perceptive things. There was a whole string of things about Jax as a Gen Zer and like creating TikTok videos, and
oh my god,
it was very funny.
I feel like his TikToks would be those like outfit TikToks where they're like in motion, like in like with the like white, like I don't know why that's in my head.
No, yeah, that would definitely happen. He's so dramatic.
Like, imagine him as like a dapper teen. Like, I can see it.
Yeah, he's definitely a TikTok guy.
Well, thank you so much. I want to, of course, as the bookseller in the room, I want to remind everybody that books by both of our authors today are just one click away. That green button, center screen, where it says purchase books here. You can get books by both of our authors. Yes.
Look at these covers. They're so beautiful.
And if you purchase a copy of The Mask Falling from Village Books, we will send you an autographed book plate. They are lovely. Thank you for providing those, Samantha. We appreciate it. So again, to the audience, thank you. And to my authors, thank you so much. Before we sign off, any final words, ladies?
Just thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah, it really has.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
So
this was so fun. And thanks for all the questions. You guys did awesome.
Yes, and thank you so much, Amanda, for chairing. It's been amazing.
It's been awesome.
Yeah. All right. And with that, I think we will say good afternoon and good night.
Yeah, good night.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.